Just to sort of let you a little bit know more about Spain. Obviously, Spain is where Spanish comes from, and Spanish, I think, is either the second or the third most widely spoken language in the world. Imagine maybe some of you might even be learning Spanish. I can't remember if somebody in this class did. I did know that in my sixth grade class, there was at least one or two kids who were learning Spanish. But what a lot of people actually don't know, and this is one of the things that I loved about Spain, is actually it's a very diverse country, right? So what we call Spanish in English, and they actually call it Spanish Español in Latin America as well. If you go into Spain, they call it Castilian, named after the region of Spain where it comes from, which is called Castile. Yeah, so here's something that most people don't know that you now will know. So just like we don't say someone speaks British, we say they speak English because the language comes from England, not Scotland or Wales or Ireland. In Spain, they say, well, they don't say Spanish because it's not the only language that's spoken in Spain. They call it Castilian because that's where it comes from. In Spanish, we would call it Castellano. Okay, so really quickly, what we've learned already. Just real quick before I start, does anybody know who this fella is on the right, who I'm circling with my cursor? That is Stalin, correct. Remember, again, as I mentioned before, Stalin was an ethnic minority within Russia. Excellent. A lot of people recognize him. Fantastic. Stalin was Georgian. And again, I mentioned before, Stalin was actually not his real name. That was his revolutionary name. In the middle is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who at the time was American president. And over here on the left, does anybody remember who this fella is? He was the leader at that time of Great Britain. Winston Churchill. Excellent, Porcupine. Thank you. Okay. And here we see them at this particular case. This is Yalta, where the three of them are getting together to try to decide what the world's going to look like once the Nazis and the Japanese are defeated. Okay. So again, we start off learning about, again, thinking about history not as lists of names and dates and people to memorize, but history ultimately is really, again, a story. And indeed, the two words, I think we talked about this before, like in Spanish, history is historia, and historia can also be used to say story. History is the story of mankind, or humankind, I should say, of people like you and me, as well as what we would call famous people like Stalin or Churchill, everybody knows, right? But again, it's very much a human story, right? Just like anything you would watch on TV or books that you would read, except this is factual. This has really happened. So when you think about it this way, and that's why we're going to end the activity with trying to put ourselves in Mao's shoes and try to think about what it would have been like to live through what he lived through and then be in charge. Right. It's important to keep that in mind. Again, it makes history more interesting, but also allows you to understand it a bit more. Also, as well, as we mentioned before, World War II in itself, as a major event, was an environment, right? It creates an environment that all these people are sort of reacting to and trying to shape, right? So it shaped the options available and the choices that individuals made. Again, whether those individuals were leaders of powerful country or everyday people, right? I mean, war affects people, everyday people too. It's not just the people at the top who are commanding armies. It's everyday people who are getting displaced, who might get injured, who might lose family members, or themselves might be killed, right? And how people react to that will react to that in different ways. In 11, they're overthrown in a revolution, and the Republic of China is declared, right? And that's led by the Chinese Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, or KMT as it's written in English, led by Sun Yat-sen, right? And, well, as I told you before, what happens when an empire or a state collapses? Chaos, right? And indeed, while they're thinking Chinese Republic forever, it doesn't really quite work out that way, because once they get rid of the Manchus, now everyone's like, well, no, I want to be in charge. So here's Sun Yat-sen, who thought he was going to be in charge. And here's one of his main generals who used to serve the Manchus, a guy named Yuan Shikai. And he decides, well, I don't want to be beneath, I'm a high status person. Why would I want to be beneath this guy, Sun Yat-sen? I want to be emperor of China. And he makes himself emperor of China. And then he's overthrown. And to make a long story short, the country breaks down. Again, we have to remember, China is a massive, massive place, right? And Stalin thinks they're doing this because they want the Nazis to kill as many Russians as possible to weaken Russia, so then Russia can't do anything about when the war is over. And Stalin is correct. That is exactly what they were thinking, right? And indeed, they don't actually land in mainland Europe, and they do first through Italy, which again is not a major part of, let's say, where the war is being fought. They don't do things like D-Day until 1944. That is like 3 years later, after America's joined the war. They finally started facing in against main parts of the German military.